Hello guys, how are you today? Good afternoon and good morning. First, I'd like to thank you, Hal, and Geophysical Insights for this interesting event. I am Marwa Hussein. As Hal mentioned, I'm assistant professor at Ain Shams University. Today, I'm gonna share with you some research updates about the comparison between the machine learning workflows, more specifically the workflow that Chavasti that Albro has just spoke about, versus the conventional interpretation, conventional seismic inversion workflows. I'm gonna use data from offshore Nile Delta, that comes from Simian Field. It's in offshore Nile Delta of Egypt. Here is the outline of today's talk. I'm going to start with a simple introduction. First, I'd like to say why we are motivated about Lithofacies prediction. Why are we interested in Lithofacies prediction? A little bit about the Simian field and the geology of the field in addition to the dataset. I'll speak briefly about the workflow that I used in this study. I also would like to go briefly through the petrophysical analysis of some of Simian wells. I also briefly discussed the application of k-means to lithofacies classification from well log data and comparing these lithofacies logs from k-means to the actual lithofacies from the petrophysical analysis. Afterwards, I speak about some application for net reservoir discrimination and then predicting the lithofacies using some classification volumes. Afterwards, I'll share with you some of the results about the application of seismic inversion and Bayesian classification for lithofacies prediction. Then I'll start the comparison between the results that I got from the machine learning workflow versus the seismic inversion workflow. I would like also to end with some conclusion and acknowledgements. As you all guys know that we always interested in understanding and in imaging our lithofacies. So the process starts very early during drilling a well. We usually have a geologist who look at the cuttings and try to identify the different lithofacies and different depths and build his mud log or composite log. If we are lucky enough, we might get some core data. As you know, guys, the core data are quite expensive. So if we got a core data, a geologist again start to look at the cores, try to do some observation, and then come up with different interpretation about for these cores. For instance, here the geologist identified the sandstones, the mudstones, and there were some missing parts too. Moving to the petrophysical analysis, where a petrophysicist take all the well logs or for the drilled wells, and try to do the petrophysical analysis to get the porosity, saturation, V shale volume, and then come up with the kind of lithofacies log at the end of his evaluation. But usually, guys, for any project, we need to see the distribution of our sands. We need to see the distribution of the different lithofacies. Even sometimes we need to, for classic reservoirs, which is the case that I'm dealing with here, we need to understand how the reservoir and the seal, or if we have subtle buffle within the reservoir, we need to we need to be able to image the distribution of the sands and even the seal rocks or buffles. So usually we do inversion and try to use some cross plots, Bayesian classification to come up with a different lithofacies volume. For instance, here, this is a line from a study already published about the gas probability volume, or a line extracted from a gas probability volume by using conventional inversion approach. The recent approach developed by Chavasti that he just described a few minutes ago It uses the unsupervised machine learning, specifically k-means and sum, in order to interpret the lithofacies volume and the lithofacies across the whole field and come up with a 3D volume of lithofacies. So the question now, um, which approach is better, the unsupervised machine learning approach versus the conventional inversion approach? Moving to the data set comes from Simian Field, which is located in the eastern part of the West Deep Marine Concession in offshore Nile Delta. The reservoir is basically a slope channel complex. It consists of three main parts: the main channel, the central channel, and the northwest sheet-like sand facies. The dataset consists of two main subdivisions. So first, I have a seismic data, which consists of 3D full stack seismic volume. This field was acquired several times, so I'm dealing with the 2006 data. And we also had the 3D angle stack seismic data. For the well data, we got 7 wells with conventional logs released and one core analysis for semi-one well. Moving to the workflow, I started with the well log data. I did the QC of the well log data, and then I did the petrophysical analysis in order to get these petrophysical logs, applied some cutoffs in order to understand the reservoir properties and determine the net reservoir and net bay interval and build the reservoir lithofacies. On the other hand, I tried k-means in order to see how the reservoir lithofacies would look like. When it comes to the seismic data, I started with the 3D pre-stack depth migrated data. The data was released in time. And for the full stack, I generated some attributes and selected some of them in order to run the sum classification volumes, then applied Chavez-T workflow that he just mentioned in order to predict the lithofacies and create different lithofacies probability volumes. So here we're gonna the output of this process is a lithofacies volumes with their probabilities too, which is quite good. When it comes to the angle stack data, I used the angle stack to create the angle gathers. Then I did the pre-stack simultaneous inversion, a typical workflow for any geophysicist who's trying to do lithofacies prediction. And then I imported the output or the inversion product to lambda mu rho analysis, which in turn imported to or inputted to Bayesian classification in order to predict the lithofacies with their associated probability volumes. Finally, I compared between the lithofacies volumes and the actual reservoir lithofacies by using Kramer's V and percent fit metric in order to test the statistical robustness and the accuracy of the predicted lithofacies. Here is a summary of the petrophysical analysis for 3 selected wells from Simian. Simian 1 penetrated the southern part of the channel, Simian 2 penetrated the far northern part, and Simian 3 penetrated the midway. This table summarizes the petrophysical properties of this reservoir. As you can see, the reservoir is quite heterogeneous with variable porosity, water saturation, and even shale content. When we look at the southern part of the channel, we see that the reservoir is quite thick. We can see thicker sand units in the southern part that becomes thinner as we go towards the northern part. The reservoir is quite heterogeneous, as you can see from the different well logs from left to right. We have the gamma ray here, density neutron combination, sonic data, resistivity, and here the calculated porosities, saturation, B shale, net reservoir thickness, and net bay. As you can see, the shale content even increases as we go toward the north. So the shale content of the channel at Simian 1 is less than Simian 3, which has a lower shale content compared to Simian 2. Moving to k-means, here is the KDE for the for the gas sands, and here we have the same KDE, the same plot for the wet sands, and here we have the KDE for the shales. So here we use 6 different wells included in the k-means analysis. We have 2 two different fluids, which are gas and water, and the three lithophases are basically gas sands, wet sands, and shales. When we look at the results for one of Simian wells with Simian GI, this is one of the development wells in the field. Here we have the gamma ray, density neutron, resistivity, V shale, porosity, saturation, and here we have the lithophases from k-means, and here we have our estimates for the reservoir thickness and pay thickness from the petrophysical analysis. As you can see, there is a very good agreement between the petrophysical lithophases versus the k-means. Moving to the sum, first I'd like to show you a seismic line that crosses Simian 1 well, which penetrated the southern part of the channel complex, and the green horizon here shows the top of the channel, and the orange horizon here shows the base of the channel. So when we start to include this input, this amplitude data, along with these 6 different wells to some analysis, and try to plot the data by using 7 by 7 2D color map, we got this classification volume. As you can see here, a sample observation shows that there is a good agreement between the gas sands, which colored in red, and the purple clusters. And we can see also the cyan clusters are correlated well to the shales, which colored in gray. And we can see these red clusters that are well correlated to the wet sands, which colored in yellow. So there is a good agreement between the input sum, or between this sum classification volume and the volume. So here the sum is capable of discriminating the gas sands versus the other phases. Applying the workflow that Chavesty has just described, we got this classification, this lithophases volume derived from sum. And here, this is just a well display for Simian 1 when we have the seismic data, the sum classification volume, and here a trace extracted from the lithophases volume. And finally, here we have the reservoir lithophases. As you can see, there is a good agreement between the reservoir lithophases versus the lithophases predicted from sum. Moving to Bayesian classification for lithophases prediction. So here I plotted the data, or the well data of lambda rho and mu rho calculated from 6 different wells. The yellow colors, again, these are the wet sands, the red one are the gas sand, and shale are colored in green. As you can see, at typical reservoir, we see a lot of overlap between the different phases, because here we are using only 2 different attributes. And the other thing, these overlapping lithophases creates ambiguity in the interpretation. So when I applied these KDEs on the inversion product, in this case lambda rho and mu rho, I got with this most likely lithophases case. Again, this is more or less the same line that I displayed in the previous slide. Here we have the gas sands and the wet sands, and the grays here are shales. Moving to the comparison between the machine learning workflows versus the conventional workflow. Here is a seismic line. This line was extracted from the southern part of the field. As you can see here, when we look at the sum-derived lithophases, we start to see the gas sands within the individual channel, within the channel complex quite clearly. I also can see the gas sand here within the central channel quite clearly. And when it comes to the quality, or the quality of this prediction, we got a global fit of about 69% and Kramer's view of about 46 46%, that suggests a good correlation between the predicted lithophases versus the actual reservoir lithophases. Here is the same line extracted from the inversion drive lithophases. As you can see here, when it comes at semi-unit channel, the inversion drive lithofacies tend to overestimate the gas sense, as you can see here, compared to the lithofacies derived from the sum classification workflow. It shows the gas sands within the main channel and within the central channel, but also it shows that this part of the reservoir, so in between the two different channels, it displays gas signs. When we start to look at the RMS amplitude here, again here, we can't see any brightness in this part of the reservoir that suggested these two different channels are not connected. I do not expect to see a gas sand in this part of the reservoir, and this agrees with the sum derived lithofacies volume. And this is expected. We expect to see this gas sands in the middle because this is a thing that inherited in the input itself. So here is the same line extracted from the lambda row, and it shows relatively low values of lambda rho in this part of the reservoir. That's why it misinterpreted this part of the reservoir as a gas sand. Although the seismic, the lithofacies doesn't look like this part of the reservoir might be a gas sand. So moving to geobody extraction to the left here, I'm gonna show you the individual channels or the geobodies of the individual channels within the channel complex, as you can see here. So, and here I showed the geobodies from different neurons that are interpreted as a gas sense. So all the channels that I'm seeing here comes from the gas sense. As you probably see, the reservoir is quite heterogeneous. We have many neurons and many geobodies are represented as a gas sense. Here is the geobody extracted for the gas sense from the inversion drive lithofacies. When we start to look at this part of the reservoir, and trying to calculate the estimate for semi-NDS. By the way, semi-NDS was kept as a blind well. We didn't include the semi-NDS in the analysis. So when we started to compute volumetrics for semi-NDS, I got recoverable gas of 46.3 PCF compared to a cumulative production of 54 PCF. And here I have the simian TS penetrated this part only of the reservoir. So I calculated this part. However, the reservoir is quite heterogeneous. There might be some clusters that could be interpreted as a gas sense, but we cannot include them because we don't have much penetration for this part of the reservoir. When I did the same process with the geobody extracted from the inversion derived lithofacies, I got recoverable gas of 549.4 PCF, which is quite high compared to the actual production. So in summary, when it comes to here, I'm comparing the sum drive lithofacies volume versus the inversion drive lithofacies volume. When it comes to resolution, the sum drive lithofacies have higher resolution compared to the inversion drive lithofacies volume because the inversion is still affected by the tuning thickness and is still limited by the tuning thickness of the input seismic. When it comes to well controls, we can run some with or without well controls, but for the lithofacies prediction, the more wells that we include in the analysis, the better the prediction is gonna be. But for inversion, we still need well data in order to do our inversion workflows. For volumetric estimates, we got a good estimate from some, and the estimate from the inversion drive lithofacies is quite questionable. When it comes to editing, as I just showed you guys, that lithofacies derived from the lithofacies derived from the inversion shows a gas sense between the two different channel of the field that it's very hard to be edited, and it's very hard to exclude this part or reinterpret this part as an interpreter. But when it comes to some or the sum drive lithofacies volume, we can easily edit any cluster that we suspect it's related to the actual lithofacies. When it comes to timing, usually the sum process or the machine learning process takes several weeks, but the inversion takes up 2 months. The noise sensitivity, some is more sensitive to noise compared to the inversion workflows. The time depth charts, usually some needs very accurate time depth charts, while the inversion needs good time depth charts. For angular stacks, I think inversion required us to have angular stacks, while some we can play with a full angular stack at this case study. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that the inversion drive lithofacies workflow is affected by the inversion challenges, such as low frequency model building, wavelet selection, tuning thickness, and the rest of the stuff when it comes to inversion. So in conclusion, here in this study, I used two different techniques for lithofacies prediction at semi field. I kept the input data the same and consistent to compare between the two different methods. The unsupervised machine learning approach using sum and key means provide lithofacies volume with better resolution compared to that derived from the conventional inversion techniques. Confusion matrices, in addition to other statistical parameters like global Kramer's V, and global fit, are used to evaluate the two different lithofacies approach. And at the well location, the sum and the inversion looks very similar. But away from the well location, I think sum gives us better results compared to the inversion, as I just showed. Some drive lithofacies shows better results away from the well location, as I just mentioned, and this was validated by geobody extraction and computed recoverable gas in both cases. The sum drive lithofacies workflow, it can be easily edited, while it's very hard to do any edits to the inversion drive lithofacies volume. The last thing is the inversion-derived lithofacies suffers from the inversion challenges, such as non-uniqueness. By the way, the sum process itself also non-uniqueness, but the process itself has better uniqueness compared to the inversion. Finally, I'd like to end up with some acknowledgement. I'd like to thank Geophysical Insights and Dr. Smith for providing Paradise software and for useful discussion. Also, I'd like to thank the Egyptian General Petroleum Corporation, Rashpetco, for releasing this data for research work. I also like to thank Albro, Travesty, the Brasakari, Johnny Wu, and Islam Muhammad for useful discussion. And in addition to the Geophysical Insights support team, especially Thomas, Ken Kuhn, and Mike Coney. Finally, I'd like to thank you all and welcome any questions.
Yeah, Marwa, we've got about 2 minutes for questions. And in fact, you have two questions here. I'll just read them off. Nigel Pike has asked, all your attributes are from stacked data. Why didn't you include individual off-stack derived attributes as input to SOM?
I already tried angular stacks and different attributes derived from angular stacks as an input to SOM, but for this reservoir, I found the full stacks gives us better results, especially the full stack has better signal to noise ratio compared to the angular stacks.
Yeah, I would add, and Alvaro can speak to this later, but we do incorporate angle stacks at times. Charlie asked if you have AVO class 2 pay sand in your ML. He says machine learning won't work using the full stack. A similar question, I think.
Sorry, could you repeat this question,
please? If you have AVO class 2 pay sand in your ML won't work using the full stack. I think
in this case, yeah. In this case, we might need to try the angular stacks.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do, in fact, from time to time.
Yeah.
That's actually part of our best practices to include that in different settings.